Welcome to our second of three programs for the winter, our History Roundtable series. This one is entitled Fire. Some of you said you saw the last one already on MCAT, which was on Local 3038. We have copies of all these programs at the History Center, so if you miss anything, come on over and pick up a copy and you can watch it at home and make your popcorn and have a good time with it. On the back of your program, I hope you all picked up one of these programs. We have a lot of neat activities coming up. On 1 month from today, we're going to have a program on scouting, and Dusty Dayshaw and Mike Nelson will be here as a couple of our presenters. There'll be others as well, and they'll talk about all the adventures that the Scouts in Bonner Milltown had in Troop 5, also the Girl Scout Troop and the Campfire Girls, so that should be fun. Then on April 30th, it's Bike Walk Bus Week, and we're going to have an open house at the new state park. There's information about watch for the details of the times for that. And then we'll have walking tours, and we're going to have a new pamphlet available for people who just want to stop by and explore Bonner on their own. We'll have a little pamphlet to hand out. And then we're going to reinstitute the Old Timers festivities on May 1st. Lions Club is letting us use the barn, and we'll have the pie and the coffee. And some of us who were always on the outside looking in probably qualify to be old timers now, but even if you don't, you can come. So we're expanding that a little bit, so you don't have to be an old timer to come. Okay, so I think we are ready to go. Our program today, we quite accidentally found out we were going to do firefighting anyway. Talking to Bill Caldwell, he said, well, it's the 40th anniversary of Station 4, and we didn't know. So we expanded it into a reunion party for all of the volunteers and paid staff out there. We're going to start way back in time. Glenn Smith is going to start us off way back in 1919, and then Dennis Sane is going to read an account of a couple of the forest workers from the mill who were trapped in a wildfire in 1961. And then Frank is going to talk a little bit about how you do protect a mill from fire, because that's a really important thing to not have your mill burned down as it did in 1919. And finally, we're going to invite Chief Caldwell up, and he will lead a conversation with all of the folks who are in attendance, recalling some of the history of the 40 years of Station 4. So, Glenn, it's all yours.
Okay. Everybody hear me? Now can you? Better yet? All right. Well, I am privileged to be here with Bill Caldwell, Dennis Sane, and Frank. Frank Betts and I done a lot of these little get-togethers for the mill over here. Right towards the end, we would do fire training from its first stages with just the fire extinguishers, and maybe we'd break out an 1.5-inch line. And I see Keith Bumstead was with us. Keith done a lot of training, familiarizing our crew with those 1.5-inch lines, plus the nozzles and stuff. So as I look out over the group, I am pretty tickled to see a lot of my old friends here. But what I want to do is to go back I'm going to go back a little past 1919. I'm going to go back right around the turn of the century and talk about some attitudes. I'm going to pick the old Titanic as an example. When she was built, it was the ship. Nothing could happen to it. And on its maiden voyage, we found out that all this planning and stuff didn't amount to a damn. Bumped into an iceberg, dove under the waves, and that was the end of that. So the attitude at the time was technology is so great, that we're right out on the cutting edge and we can do all these neat things, but we've never really tested it. So when the time come for Titanic, it failed badly. Okay, let's bring her down a step, take her out to the mill here. About 1919, probably the night before, we got a write-up in the Missoulian here. On January 17th, 1919 is when the Missoulian picked up on this. But anyway, If you'd ask somebody out here at Bonner what that fire system was like, can you guys handle a fire? You know, just what do you got out here? Oh yeah, we can handle that fire. You know, we got this Blackfoot River running right by with bazillions of gallons of water. We got steam pumps, 1,200 gallons a minute and up. Boy, we can just squirt water. We got these 2.5-inch lines with this nozzle, and we can squirt water from here way the hell and gone over there. We're covered. So, okay, the test came. The test came on January, the evening of January, probably the 16th. The mill caught fire. And a very confident crew stepped in there to start the proceedings going. And it started getting away. This is looking bad. And the more it got away, the worse things started looking. And finally, it got to the point to where we were losing ground so bad that the powerhouse caught fire. That's where all the steam is being generated for these pumps. Now, we had a good crew out there from what I heard. They were getting after with these poor old hoses with those funny nozzles. And Bill and the rest of you firemen, I'm sure, will pick up on what a nozzle should do and how it breaks that water up. But anyway, we had these guys that could just squirt water for a whole big distance. And they're out there squirting their water, and the next thing you know, the pressure starts dropping. They can't feed them boilers, get too damn hot. They're stripped down to their shirts, which is another thing. In today's training, you know, you put on them turnouts and they're heavy, but they're heavy for a reason. But these guys stripped down to their shirts anyway, and they finally, we can't handle it. We lost it. So since then, fire sciences has picked up, and just in my career out here, which is 45 years, there's been a lot of technology come out. And I'm not going to delve into that because, you know, these guys here from Station 4 in Missoula Rural, you know, they're pretty incredible. In fact, incredible to the point to where I've attended a couple of their banquets where they issue awards to outstanding firefighters. And it's incredible what some of these kids are doing. I wouldn't want to try to keep up with them. Dragging these hoses up these stairs and whatnot. My goodness, they're knocking hell out of some of these big city departments. You know, Missoula of all places, you know. So this is pretty impressive. That's why I want these guys to talk about their training now, especially them old hose nozzles and whatnot we had. Our fire system out here was, we had several hydrants. Well, this came after our lessons. So let me dig into that a little bit. The lessons we learned from that was we got to have a water supply that's more dependable other than these pumps and the boiler house. So they built a big old storage tank back of the town here. It sits a little bit this side of the Bonner post office and sits up on the hill. And the bottom of that tank is about the same elevation as the roof of the stone warehouse building. So there's a little over 50,000 gallons of water in here. That in turn was put into about, I think, a 6-inch line, wasn't it, Frank? Roughly a 6-inch line come down into Bonner. There was a row of hydrants that went down the street. The Hotel Margaret had 3 of them. That was a pretty important building. So there was 3. There was one right by where Mrs. Fleming and Tommy Fleming lived at the post office. There was one on the next corner down there on Ross Street. Then there was one down at the intersection of Ross and Margaret Street, which run in front of the hotel. Anyway, this was gravity feed. So if the powerhouse does catch on fire, we got that gravity, you know, and you figure water weight at 8 1/3 pounds per gallon, roughly, coming from that elevation. It's quite a bit of pressure down here. So the next thing, we didn't have the engines because there were still a lot of them under steam power, those old fire engines. Missoula City sent their engine out. I don't know what the make of that engine was, but it was steam powered according to the article in the paper. And they couldn't get it up over the road to Marshall Grade. So what they did is they hooked it onto a flat car behind the streetcar and run it out to Bonner on the streetcar tracks, offloaded in back of the post office. And it sat out here as kind of a reserve in case this thing flared up again. Okay, for the city of Bonner, for the town of Bonner, I guess, couldn't call it a city, little village. Anyway, what we had was what we call hose carts. They look like two big buggy wheels. I think we've donated one, and I think it wound up at Fort Missoula. Sat out of Station 1 for a while. It's out of Fort Missoula. Okay, what they would do, there was 3 or 4 hose houses out here that they kept those carts in. Fire broke out. A couple of guys would grab a hose cart, run to the nearest fire hydrant, hook those hoses up, get them ready, and then open the hydrants and charge them, and they'd fight the fire that way. So the only fire that I can recall was at Earl Fuller's house. Donna, do you remember that one? Okay, it was at Earl's place was 2-story. And after that fire, it is now 1-story, and I believe Justin Noyes lives there now in Earl's old place. But anyway, the system, I can't say it worked that great because I was kind of a snot-nosed kid at the time. I can't say it worked that bad because the house is still out here, those that are being uprooted and hauled out. So I think it was about the mid-50s. The Butte Mines sent down a fire engine. It was our first one. And Frank, I think he used that to pressure check hoses with. They sent that unit down along with our yellow ambulance that we had. That thing could get up to a sizzling 35 miles an hour. And we had a little bit bigger one. It was set up to the Woods crew about that same time. It was a gray Suburban. That was back probably in the mid to late 50s that was set up there. But anyway, we had our fire engine. The first night that engine came, it was bright yellow with the Anaconda arrowhead on the side of it. And Ty Jacobson got in there, and he run that thing up and down the street a few times, run the siren. And we were all duly impressed. We got a fire truck now, so we can kind of coil up these old hose carts, put them away. So as the mill it grew in size, it grew to this great big tank up here. What is that, about a million? 500,000 gallon tank up here on the hill. Big black one. And I can tell you from personal experience on that tank, when Mount St. Helens blew, she dumped about 300 and some pounds per acre of ash. Well, I got called out, being I was one of the crew chiefs out here, I got called out to hose that roof off, the big square building. Got up on top of that thing. We hooked up some, an inch and 2.5 inch line, gated it into 1.5 inches. I got a hold of that thing because, I got a size 2 hat, a 56 coat. So I grabbed a hold of that nozzle and I told Al Wagner, open that valve up, but open her slow, so he's opening that thing up, and the next thing, I'm coming up in the air with that. That thing had pressure like you couldn't believe. So we toned her down a little bit, and we put a big loop behind it and everything like we were taught in fire training on how to sit on that thing and hold it. And we hosed that roof off, and it was, as the ash was coming off, it looked kind of like concrete coming off there. But you can't believe the water pressure that could come out of that big tank up there. It is awesome. So that's pretty much my take on it. I could go on with this subject for the whole damn afternoon, but I've got to cut short because we got a lot of turf to cover here. So I'm going to back off on the big tank up here. And Frank will pick up a little bit of it when it comes his turn, because he took care of this system for a long time, and he knows it better than anybody I know of out here. So with that, I'm going to bow out, and I'm going to introduce the next speaker. Is there any questions before I?
How much of the mill burnt in 1919?
Complete, to the ground.
Yeah, the entire mill complex burnt. The horse barn burnt. The feed in the horse barn burnt. Powerhouse, boy, it tore that, made a mess out of the powerhouse. The planer and the buildings this way in the yard remained intact. There was another interesting feature about that, and I think a lot of you guys can remember. You know, we're talking about antiquated fire systems. For the, about where the clock house is now, this way, there was a wooden fence. And by every fence post was a 50-gallon barrel full of water, had a lid on it. On top of each one of those 50-gallon barrels was a conical-shaped bucket. The reason for the conical shape was to keep the workers from stealing them, taking them home for water buckets. That was our fire system for this end of the mill at that time. And that pretty well, gee, do you remember those old barrels out there? I don't want to put the finger on you there. That shows our age. You know, we're not quite as old as them, but, you know, they were up there until the 60s, those damn buckets, before when they started building a new building, they got rid of them. But, so anyway, I'm going to, any more questions before I?
Yeah. Now, that 1919 fire, how long was the mill down before they got another mill rebuilt?
About a year. And the building that's standing, that they rebuilt is still there. And I have a list of the original equipment, if anybody's interested in the edgers, the bandsaws, you know, all the equipment that was put into that. The name of the architecture. So I have all that, and we have it down at our history center. So we have a good record of that. Anybody that might be interested in what the original mill, I guess you'd call it the Phoenix, that grew up out of them ashes, it's what we have today. But since then, we have changed that thing time and time again. At the end, it was a dual end auger. A lot of computer equipment in there, a lot of laser equipment and stuff that's way over my head to explain how that run. But it took me 45 years to get to that point, but that old building has seen a lot of changes. Okay, any more questions? Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to Dennis. Is that the way we're going to go? Okay, Dennis, you're up.
Yeah, go there. Well, they talk here at the Rural Fire Department, 40 years this year. It'll be 50 years in August this year when the Gold Creek fire burned. And this is just a little story. The assistant logging superintendent for Anaconda Company, he was their we call him the road runner or engineer. And this is his story when they were trapped in the Gold Creek fire. On the second day of August, 1961, was just another scorcher like all the other days had been for the past month. Every day the weather forecaster said, fair and warmer. The forests in western Montana were becoming parched to the point where green leaves and needles were wilting under the merciless heat of the August sun. This summer was rivaling the notoriously dry summer of 1910. As a logging engineer for a large timber company, I was assisting two dozer operators lay a culvert in a new logging road. We had just completed the job, and wiping the sweat from my brow, I relished the thought of a cool shower after work. I noticed dust rising from the road up the creek. Assuming it was just another logging truck headed for the mill, I didn't give it a second thought. However, my assumption proved wrong. I glanced up and saw the loader operator coming down the road. The way he slid the pickup to a stop and came running over to us, I knew it meant only one thing, fire. He shouted, "Get those dozers up to the landing on the double. There is a fire near the landing and spreading fast." When a fire breaks out, it is my job to scout ahead of the dozers building the fire line. We dropped everything on the spot. Dozer operators headed their big tractors up the road. I passed them with my pickup because I wanted to be there first to look the situation over. What I saw from the landing was anything but pleasant. In fact, it was downright horrifying. The fire was burning in dry logging slash, and even though it was less than an acre in size when I arrived, it crackled and roared like a huge monster, defying anyone or any kind of machine to come near. Tongues of flame were leaping upward and devouring whole trees within seconds. Like a gluttonous appetite of an insatiable monster, the flames kept leaping forward. By now, the fire was reaching gargantuan proportions and generating energy of its own. It did not need a wind to make its relentless advance, however. Ferocious the fire may be, it must be controlled and put out. It was a long shot, but I figured with luck we could flank the fire on each side and toward evening might cool down enough to pinch it off at the head end. There was a slight breeze blowing from the west which kept the fire headed east. I assume we were relatively safe by flanking the fire by about 300 yards to the south. Another dozer with the logging crew began flanking the north side. I led the dozers up a skid trail. At the top of a small ridge, I left the trail and began spotting fire line through the timber. Fred was on the lead dozer, pushing over trees with his powerful machine and clearing out the duff, making a clean swath down to bare mineral soil. Huge fir and larch came crashing down to the earth with thunderous roars as the powerful bulldozers waged war against the merciless fire. It was a savage race against time, machines against nature. Bulldozers are the gods of battle in the forest fire, but now the big machines and man's contrivance seemed trivial and on the brink of helplessness against the unsurmountable monster. The fire line seemed like a mere thread against the towering flames. However futile our attempts may seem, we must keep pushing forward, burying the earth, hoping to starve the fire of fuel. We were making good headway building fire line. Fred was not far behind me, pushing over the trees nearly as fast as a man could walk. I picked out a small ridge which led to the top of the divide between Gold Creek and Belmont. Things were going well, I thought. Up until now, there wasn't any smoke to hinder our vision because the fire was 300 yards to our left, and the west wind was carrying the smoke away from us. The ridge I followed began to rise quite sharply, which slowed down the dozer and allowed me to scout ahead. Now the dozer was a good 300 yards behind me. I climbed to the top of a small knob which jutted out from the ridge we were following. Suddenly, something happened that made my hair on my neck bristle with fear. Shadows disappeared and the forest became very dark. Behind me and to my right, the smoke blackened out the light of the afternoon sun. The wind had changed from the west to the northwest and was driving the fire directly towards us. I knew instantly that we were in trouble. The flames were crawling, and no line in the world could stop this monstrous onslaught. My only chance for survival was to get back to the dozer and the fire line, but quickly. Fear drove me through the near impenetrable forest with unbelievable speed and energy. Fred was already on his way back out when I arrived. The fire was driving hard and fast up the hill. It was a sight to behold, and yet one that will haunt me the rest of my life. Not 100 yards from us was a solid wall of flame as high as the treetops and half a mile wide. Trees stood like black statues silhouetted against the orange-red flames that roared like 1,000 waterfalls. We were trapped. Our escape back out of the fire line was already cut off. I knew it would be pure suicide to run. Our only escape route left open was ahead of the fire, and this fire was raging towards us as if it had a personal grudge. We had been driven away from the fire line and were into the timber again. Fred said he would try to build the line back out to meet the one we had built going in. I told him to go ahead. He had not gone over 100 feet when the heat became too intense for him to stay on the seat. He backed his dozer up and made another quick swath to widen the tiny patch of bare earth, about twice the width of his dozer blade. He dropped the blade, left the engine idling, and crawled underneath the big machine in the nick of time. I came running from behind only a second later and joined him under the rear of the crawler. The fire was getting closer and closer, and I was afraid that the end was near. The heat from the inferno was too hot to breathe. We tried shielding our faces with our hard hats, but they were too hot to touch. They were now useless as a shield. The smoke and intense heat made breathing next to impossible. When the fire hit the edge of our tiny clearing, the air was instantly filled with flying sparks and red-hot embers. We frantically began covering the embers with dirt, but this raised such a dust cloud that we had to lay face down and remain quiet, let the sparks fall where they may. The only movements we made were to brush the burning embers off each other's back. Fred shouted to me over the roar of the flames, "We've got to get out of here or we will burn up." The bulldozer's going to catch on fire in a minute, and then we've had it. I looked out at the world around us. There was fire everywhere, and all too uncomfortably close. Thinking Fred's statement, I couldn't see any possible way the dozer could keep from burning. I too would like to get out of here, but where could we go? If the machine, which was giving us the only protection available, caught on fire and we were driven out from under it, we were finished. Out in the clearing, it was just too hot for any life to exist. For some reason, Fred and I happened to look around simultaneously at the front of the machine and saw what we thought was both the beginning of the end. Twigs and needles between the mainspring and the frame were burning directly under the oil pan. I thought it wouldn't be long now, and the oil in the engine would ignite. Then the fuel tank would go, which was directly over our heads. Or maybe the hydraulic lines would burst from the heat and spray us with hot oil. Maybe I'd get the shovel off the machine and commence digging a hole for us away from the dozer. I asked Fred where the shovel was. No chance of getting that, he replied. It's behind the side panels next to the engine. Well, I thought, I'd give it a try anyway. If we're going to go down for the count, we'd go down fighting. I was going to get that shovel. I started to crawl up from underneath the machine. As I tried to rise on my elbows, something was holding me back. I could hardly move. Suddenly I realized what was happening. The fire was consuming the oxygen from the air, and I didn't even have the strength to crawl. Somehow I managed to move about a foot, far enough to look out from behind the track. Even if I had the strength to crawl, it was still too hot outside to exist, let alone work. Maybe we had done all the firefighting we were ever going to do, I thought. The machine caught on fire, we wouldn't have the strength to get out from under it. Is this the way Faith had planned our final hour? Would we pass out from lack of oxygen or feel the fire blister and consume for an eternity? I looked at my watch. Only 20 minutes had passed since we crawled under it. On all sides of us was fire. Above us, the smoke choked out the sky so completely that even though it was mid-afternoon, the only light came from the fire itself. We were so thoroughly isolated that we might just have well been in another world. Our friends and fellow workers whom we had been with and talked to not more than an hour ago now seemed an immeasurable distance away. There was absolutely nothing we could do but lie face down in the dust and wait. Within the next few hours, our destiny would be determined by the power above and beyond our control. If we only had some water to soothe our parched throats in the last few moments, a water bag hung behind the seat on the tractor. Could we get to it? The tractor was too hot to touch, and neither of us had the strength to climb up onto the machine. I don't remember how much time elapsed since I tried to get the shovel, but suddenly I felt something brush across my back. A cool breeze blew in from the west. It was a godsend, a new lease on life, so soothing, cool, and gentle. I said to myself, this breeze will bring forth fresh oxygen. Maybe I can get the water bag. I inhaled fresh air exuberantly, and it was exalting. That little bit of fresh air gave me the strength I needed to crawl up on the tractor to get the water. The tractor was searing hot to the touch, and I became dizzy and weak from moving about, but now we had water to drink. It was coffee, hot, but delicious. Even though the front of the inferno had passed, we were still prisoners of the fire. Outside our tiny island of bare ground, the world was still a fiery mass. We had seen a forest die before our eyes. A forest that was green and beautiful and full of life was now a maze of black, ugly snags. Smoke drifted lazily among the charred skeletons standing like eerie grave markers of the once living forest. Everything was so quiet now, the roar of the flames was gone. There were no needles left for the wind to whistle through, no birds to sing, or squirrels to scold them. It seemed like eons had passed since we crawled under the tractor, but my watch corrected me on that. It was only about an hour and a half. The smoke broke in the west. Mineral Peak stood bold and beautiful against the western horizon. Fred said, if the engine isn't damaged, we're going to get on that machine and drive her out of here as soon as the place cools down. In another 30 minutes, the fire began to lose its grip. We decided to move out. We checked the instrument panel. Everything read normal. We looked at each other with excited, dirty faces and both exclaimed, let's get out of here. The sun was sinking low in the west, but to us it was rising. The guy Fred Gunzo, the operator, he was our last meeting. He's in Arizona now, but he said it was something, the only thing that possibly saved them was his bulldozer was a brand-new tractor that year. The other bulldozer that was building line behind him, Henry Prost was running that, and he saw the fire blow up, and he turned his bulldozer around and tried to outrun the fire, and he ran it up on the stump, and he figured he didn't have time to try and get it out. He just bailed off and run, and his bulldozer fried to a pulp. That International was about 7, 8 years old. They had enough dirt and duff inside it, and it burned up. But Fred and Len, they were lucky. They dozed a big enough hole, and being a new tractor, he didn't have a bunch of oil spilled in it or leaky lines or fuel had run down the belly pan or anything else. So they were lucky in that respect. And from reading this, people who know Gold Creek, if they know where Horse Road is, that's where the fire started, at about the 9.5 mile on Horse Road. And where they were putting the culvert in is where Horse Creek, across the main Gold Creek Road, is where Fred and Henry and Len were putting the culvert in that day. So when Fred comes back from Arizona, I'm taking a map, and we're going to have him mark on the map so we have documented locations of where all this transpired. Well, that's good for now, unless somebody got more questions.
Well, yeah, I do, Dennis. It seems like about 25, 30 years ago, did one of the dozers burn up and stay in the woods?
They drug it out after the fire. It went to the scrap. I mean, it was totaled. It fried like a piece of toast. I think the only thing that saved Fred and Len, he left his cat running, and I have an idea. The oil kept circulating. That's probably why the oil didn't get too hot. I'm surprised that the engine could keep running when the oxygen was gone, but it stayed running all the time they were underneath the cat.
Where'd that fire stop at? Where did?
Top of Gold Creek and Cow Creek divide. It run up, didn't quite get to Cow Creek, Gold Creek Belmont divide. I think it was a total of 1,800 acres. They shut the mill down. I was still working in the mill at that time, and they loaded us on that old cab over truck, put benches on the thing, and hauled us like cows up there and kicked us out.
I remember that. I think all of us remember that. Not fun.
Because that was 2 years in a row. In 1960, they had the first Gold Creek fire at the head end of Gold Creek in Jocko, and had the Elk Creek fire at the same time. So they shut the mill down. Some of the mill workers went to the first Gold Creek fire, and the rest of us all went to the Elk Creek fire.
That guy is an excellent writer.
Yes, he was our road boss, assistant logging. He was a very smart man. He was good.
That don't mean you can write.
Oh, he was good.
Yeah,
He could do it all.
Well, that'll make you perk up and appreciate what these guys did, is listen to that story.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
And we do have copies of this up at the History Center if people want copies of it.
Well, the thing that I was thinking about was around 1972 or 75, Rudy Audio was teaching at the university, and he had a lecture to give in Billings, and he'd just gotten a little pilot's license, and he asked me if I would fly with him, and he gave me sort of like a road map, and we left the Missoula airport, and it seemed like we sort of flew through Hellgate Canyon and toward Garrison, and we're flying pretty close to the ground, and I looked off to the north, and we hadn't left Missoula, very many miles, and I looked to the north, and I could see this dozer sitting out in the woods wasn't on a road, and it was just completely rusted. And I just wondered, you have any idea of what that could have been?
Oh, back that time, some of these people bought dozers for logging and stuff, and then they couldn't keep up the payments, so they would hide them out in the woods, and sometimes they sat there for 4 or 5 years. I know up in Kramer Creek, there was what they called IMCO, bulldozer was made down in Salt Lake. The operator sat where the radiator normally is. You're up front on that. And one of them sat up the top end of Kramer Creek, Ryan Gulch, for about 5 or 6 years up there, in about that, in the 70s sometime.
But it's, you know, it was just, we just sort of flew over it. It seems like it was an area where you could look down into the woods really easily, as if it had been burned. And I just remember that thing in my mind, thinking, what the hell is a dozer setting out there? It looked like it had been burned. It was just rust red, everything. And wonder what the story was behind that.
Well, for a while, a lot of loggers lost their machines in the woods. The dust and stuff would accumulate. And at Twin Creeks, we kind of had a little better situation, especially after when we quit using the crew buses. Jard Hirsch, who lives over here, I don't know if he's here today or not, but he bought the last crew bus we had when the company sold it, and they took that one after they quit using a crew bus, and they put a 500-gallon water tank in it and a pressure washer, and used to bring it out, the crews, to wash the skid cats and the dozers and the brush cats. I know when I was piling brush, once a week, our old Irvin Satcher and I, we would tell them to bring the wash truck out, and we would have the wash truck show up about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And we'd pull in and wash the cats, put everything back together and go home, because if you wash the cat early in the day and go out, it's still wet and you're sucking in all the dirt and dust. So we would wash, and Ed O'Lean and I, when we were building road, would do the same thing. We'd have them come out in the afternoon and wash our cats out and then park them for the rest of the day. And the company had a policy in the woods, every spring breakup, they'd pull these cats in, drop the belly pans and wash them out. And we had some small fires, but we never burned up any more equipment. Go ahead, Frank.
Okay. Give me a second, Frank. I'll get you up here.
Okay. Well, to start off with, we're gonna go into back to the 1919 fire. After the sawmill was rebuilt, they added to the steam pumps, they put in some electric pumps as well, and I'm not sure at what time them electric pumps were put in. I have no idea if it was put in when the new mill was built or when. And they also installed fire sprinkler systems that were there throughout the whole plant. All the buildings in the plant had sprinklers in them, and I don't even know when that came about. But they worked. At the only problem, because there was so many fire systems to cover the entire plant, if they all went off at one time, there'd never be enough water for anything. And at best, in the spring, you had high water, you had dirty water, you had pine cones, logs, you had everything floating down the river, sticks, all kinds of stuff. And sometimes that was sucked into them suctions and went into the piping on the sprinkler systems. That was that way for many years until, probably 5 or 10 years ago, when they went with, no, it wasn't that, but, yeah, about 8 years ago, when they went to the well pumps. And so every spring, you had to go through after the high water and flush out all these systems, get all the mud out of them, clean them up, and get them ready for the next year. There was enough of them that we didn't get to all of them. So we done the ones that were the most important, that were in the high fire danger areas. we cleaned them up as much as we could and got them ready. The others we would take care of when we get a chance to get to them. Bill has a couple slides here on some sprinkler systems that are in the plant. And this here is the outside valve right here. It says open. This one here is unlocked. It's supposed to be padlocked. So that only people that are authorized to close that valve, because you don't want somebody closing these valves. If you have a fire, then you have no water to the sprinkler system to protect the plant. These are called post indicator valves. There's two of them right there. These here shut off the outside water. You want to go to the next one, I believe. And there's the valve house where the valve was housed. All of them had their own little house because we had to keep them warm. There was water in there. And as you know, water freezes when the temperature drops. We had to keep them warm. There was usually electric heaters in them. And I guess years before I went in the shop, they used to set a pan of water in there and they'd put little gas heaters in them when the water started to freeze. And that was just a story I heard. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. Can you back that up?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Anyway, there's something I heard. In the back room, we had a whole bunch of Coleman heaters, okay? Gas heaters. So anyway, go ahead with the next one, Bill. This was the main shut-off valve inside the valve house. And you shut your water off there whenever you have one that tripped. The chain there is so you can put a padlock on that. Once you open it, reset the valve, and open that, then you would put the padlock on that chain, and it stayed that way until you had a fire, or if you had some reason to shut that sprinkler down to work on it for whatever reason that was. That is the main valve. When they did trip, you had to take all these bolts off, open it up. Inside that valve is a flapper. Now, the sprinkler valves come in many kinds. And this here is a Grinnell. The flappers in different valves were different size. They also were held down in different manners. Most of them, you close the valve, you cleaned up the seat and all, then close the valve, and then you would put priming water in on top of that, and then you'd put an amount of air pressure over that went out into all the lines through the plant to keep the seat down, and then you would open this valve right here, put your padlock on it, make sure your air pressure was up, and make sure your water pressure was up, and that they were pretty much the same. You could put your air pressure was generally about 50. This one's a little high. May have been a bad valve or gauge too. But you could always tell when one's tripped. This here would be clear down there, that 250. We checked them every day and made sure that they weren't tripped. Sometimes the alarm bell would not ring and you'd have one tripped anyway for whatever reason. Maybe a pipe broke out in the plant someplace, froze and broke, and it would trip and you'd have to reset the system. And your sprinkler lines are all up there in the rafters. And I think Mr. Caldwell started passing the sprinkler heads around. Take a look at them. These are old ones. There's two of them that are from the 60s, one 64 and 65. Don't get your finger stuck in there. But anyway, these were something that I brought with me. There's one of them there that is, if you read on them sprinkler heads, it'll tell you what the temperature rating for that sprinkler head is. It'll tell you the year that it was made. One of them is 1908. And if you look at it close enough, not that one there, but if you look at it close enough, it says it was patented in 1889. So it's a very old sprinkler head. I mean, it was manufactured in 1908. Anyway, but these lines, we had to flush all of them out once a year if we had enough people to do that. A lot of time, most often, we didn't have enough people to flush all these systems out in one summer. So you tried to keep records, so you get the next ones the next year. The only thing is, these back here already had mud in them too. So you tried to keep up with the ones that we used the most to keep the water out. These sprinkler systems were an asset to the company. They did put out a lot of fires, and they would, if they didn't put the fires out, they would hold them at bay till the fire crews, each department had their own fire crews, would come and go after the fires. And like I say, if the sprinkler system couldn't put it out, then the crews that came would finish it up. And oftentimes these sprinkler heads would not be quite cover the fire, but there was not enough heat generated anymore either to trip another head. So that's where the hose stations were valuable, the fire crews were valuable, and when I come to the mill, I worked in other departments before. I worked in the pipe shop, plumbing shop. It was the fire department. We had 2 fire trucks. He mentioned one. That was a 1952 Chevy with a 500-gallon tank on it. Then we had another old Federal. I don't know where it came from or anything about it, but I'm thinking that it was either a 1,500 or 2,000-gallon tank on that. And they used that to back up the fire truck with, and you could hook onto it as well as a hydrant that we had throughout the plant too. But these fire systems, the old ones, worked, but they were just maybe that much better than a fire brigade with buckets, because they had so much mud in them, so much, debris coming down. But they did work. Some of them did work. And as the years went by, in the 1960s, or first part of 58 through 60, sometime in there, they went with a high pressure water system, as he was talking about, and there was a lot of pressure on that already. It's 2 people to a hose. And some people they could handle it. I was surprised he wasn't as big as he is now. He could handle it. Sorry. All right. Anyway, generally speaking, it took 2 people to handle the fire hose. It was something you didn't want to do by yourself, because one person had to work the hose. So therefore, that left one hand hanging on to the hose, which required more because the pressure was so great. And you could handle it then if you had somebody to back you up to loosen up that hose so you could use it. But in later years, as time went by, then we went to the wells. We had cleaner water, and that hopefully made these whole systems better. I retired just as they were installing the wells, the underground wells for this sort of thing. But while I was there, we worked on them sprinkler systems an awful lot. They required a lot of attention to make them work. But like I say, we never lost the mill again, and I don't recall that any buildings ever burned to the ground again after that. We did have a brake shack down there that burned. It was an old house that we used to go into for our breaks when they first started giving the guys a break in the morning and the afternoon. That burned down because there was no sprinkler systems in it, and somebody left hot ashes in a cigarette tray or whatever, and it got away and burned that building down. Other than that, I do not know of any buildings that burned completely to the ground in this plant after that. And he alluded to, that tank on the hill is 500,000 gallons, which is 500,000 gallons of water. That's a lot of water. If you have a fire that big, you're going to have, when you're going to use all that water, you've already lost. But I'm sure that the sprinkler systems would have taken care of the majority of it. And in 1971, Fire station number 4 did come into view. And this is kind of where I'm going to let Bill take over, but there was something I wanted to do all my life, was be a firefighter. After I seen some of the things, and I wasn't too sure I wanted to be a firefighter anymore. It was, you know, I was probably the smallest guy in the shop, and I had to pull the same weight and the same load as everybody else did out there. The sprinkler valves that we do have in the plant, there's very different ones. The first ones were rockwood, and like I said, I don't know when they was installed. Then they had the Grinnell, Automatic, Vikings, Star, and Firematics. Firematics were the last ones that I installed any of in the plant. Some of the other guys never even seen them because they retired or were not hired back. Over the years, the fire department was phased out more and more all the time because we had less and less people in the shop. I was pretty much assigned to taking care of sprinkler systems, and I did learn a lot about them, and I did like doing it because I like being by myself, and you could sit there and work on them things all day, every day, all day long. And but my thing was that I did want to make sure that everybody had a job to go to the next day, and that was what my aim the whole time that I was out here, was to make sure that everybody had a job to go to the next day. That was what I based my work schedule on every day. Thank you, Bill.
I'm gonna set up a set of pictures here really quick, and then I'll start to visit a little bit.
While Bill's getting set up, I've got a picture that I brought from home here. This is the original bunch of the fire departments from Station 1 through Station 4. I don't know if anybody here has ever seen this, or if anybody's interested in having a copy of that. Maybe if they are, maybe I can leave this with Gary and Judy, and maybe they can get some copies of that and distribute it around. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just let you pass it around. You can take a look at it. Some of us are a little bit younger in these pictures.
Say what? I'll share with you, some of us weren't even in those pictures.
If anybody wants a copy, we'll leave them with Judy and Gary, and I'm sure we can get a copy somehow. So I'll just start here and we'll pass it around and you take a look at some of the younger fellows.
All right. Excellent.
As Frank said, my name's Bill Caldwell. I'm District Fire Chief now for Missoula Rural Fire District. Started as a volunteer out here in this community in 1976. I was actually working for School District number 1 at the time, and then shortly after that left the school district and went to work at the mill in the planer stackers, and then some 7 or 8 years after that left the mill and went to work as a career firefighter. So that's my history. That's how I went through it and became part of the fire department as a career, and then have now became the chief of the organization. So, sure. You know, Keith, I'm glad you're speaking, because I didn't build a CAN program like these guys did. I've got some talking points, and I'm going to depend on each of you guys who were volunteers through all those years to help fill it in. So, and I'm dependent on you. How's that sound? Okay. We're talking a lot about Bonner, but I think you have to talk a little bit about Missoula Rural Fire District first. 50 years ago this year, Missoula Rural Fire District formed. It was formed by the Orchard Homes Country and Life Club, a men's club there. They are the original charter members. They formed that club, and they first formed the club, and it was Station 1 was in a rented building on South 3rd Street, kind of across from the Coca-Cola plant now, in 1961. Rattlesnake was Station 3. Actually, And I didn't bring any of that additional information with me, but it was later.
That was started in 1955, 56.
Not as part of rural fire, though. It may have had an independent, they may have had a station there, but it came into rural fire as number 3, so it would have probably 68 that it came into rural fire.
I don't recall, where did they have a station in the Rattlesnake?
Rattlesnake Station was right across the street from the Lincoln School and the old road on Lolo Street. And it was on Evan Reilly's property, Gilbert and Lolo.
Well,
That was the Missoula one, and that, there wasn't a fire station there prior to Missoula Rural.
Yeah.
The only fire prior to, only fire suppression they had for the Rattlesnake was the one prior to Missoula Rural, I believe, was the one that came out of Fort Missoula, and they had a Model A truck.
I think you and your brother are listed on the original volunteer roster for the Station 3. I know
I
Ralph
was
is.
never a volunteer.
Well,
I
Ralph's
just have
name
a
is
fire
also-
truck. I don't.
Anyhow, okay, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but so Station 1 was first of all on 3rd Street. Station 2 is the airport station. Station 3 is the Rattlesnake Station, and then in 1971, the Bonner area petitioned in, and on March 5th, 1971, this area became part of Missoula Rural Fire District. Frank has talked some about the fire brigade that was at the mill, and there were 2 engines here at the mill. And Art, you can help me with this. Did the mill brigades leave the mill and go out into the residential structure and fight structure?
Frank would know better than that. I don't think so.
We did from the pipe shop. None of the other brigades from the different departments ever went. But the pipe shop crew did go to 2 fires that I went on when I was working night shift, well, actually day shift. We went to the fire when the Wishard house burned down up the Blackfoot. And then we went to the fire that was over here on the flat. One night, there was a chicken coop burned down over there. So we went down and put the chicken coop out. There's no chicken in it either. No, they didn't give us a right. That was the 2 fires, and that was the only time that we did. And because I wanted to drive a fire truck too all my life, I got to drive the fire truck, but it was 1 o'clock in the morning when we come out of the gate, and I hit the siren. And I heard about it the next day.
Well, if it's any gratification by law, when you run the lights, you're supposed to run the siren. so-
Really? Well, they told me to get my foot off of that, I wanted to hear it.
Yeah, police officers are the only ones that can really run code 1 with just lights. So anyhow, 40 years ago, is this thing really loud? It sounds really loud to me. No?
Right.
Okay. So 40 years ago in March, this area petitioned into the fire district, and I can't actually find petitions and those kinds of things to tell you who carried the petitions, but the way a petition for annexation works is 50% of the property owners in the area need to sign that petition to annex into the district for service. It's presented to the county commissioners, the signatures are reviewed, and after that process is done, it's presented to the Board of Trustees, and the Board of Trustees of the fire district then make the choice as to whether it'll annex. So on March 5th, 1971, this area was accepted by the Board of Trustees. Just a little bit of piece about that. The way a fire district works is it is governed by 5 elected officials, and we have elections coming up. If there's someone in this crowd who is interested, we could use a board member from this area to be part of that Board of Trustees. So, the history stuff says that the first volunteer training session listed for this area was May 1st, 1971, and 10 volunteers attended that first training session. The first career people that were out here, we are a combination fire organization, career and volunteers together to do the job, were Jerry Hansen, Ralph Starr, and Pete Walters. And the pictures that are running behind me, there's a lot of faces that are in this crowd today. There's some that are incidents, Captain Paulson, you look a little younger there.
You're not meeting the requirements there either.
So, and we've been a combination department since the very beginning. We were a combination out here with one career person in the station, and then volunteer support from the community. And the support that came from this community, very many of those folks, they were all community-based volunteers. Many of those folks worked in industry out in this area. Many of them worked in the mill itself. And the mill was very, very supportive of the firefighting effort. And at the end of the first year, the training roster for Missoula Rural Fire District that was turned into the state for retirement credit included Art Bailey, Weymouth Derby, William Disbrow, Albert Dufresne, Howard Ellis, Wesley George, Leo Gonger, Chris Kay, Bud Warren King, Charles Klebanow, Art Bucklady, Ken Lezot, Gary Madsen, Bill Meadows, Gene Nullner, Robert Paulson, and Kenny Piers. There are many of those folks, I think, sitting here today. Would you folks stand up, please? Now, so that I don't, like I say, this is the first roster that was turned in at the end of 1971. So those folks went through their training, and then that first year they had completed enough training to be on the retirement roster. And I know there's other folks. Joe, that started after 71, you need to stand up as well. Yep. Keith? Gene, were you on this first one? Gene Nullner? You were on that first one? Who else did I miss that's here today? Frank Sherman, you better stand up in the back.
How many people here were volunteers?
Yes, how many were volunteers? Let's do it that way. Everybody that volunteered, please stand up. All right. And I'm going to ask some help from you guys on this one too, because I don't know the answer to this. I believe that the Lions Club was a big part of the organizational structure behind the beginning of the fire department. Can you guys help me with any of that, Gary?
Well, Judy gave me this that's out of the Bonner history book that was written in '76. You open your mouth. You're this is out of the Bonner history book. It was written in '76 by a bunch of people in the community that volunteered and put a book together. Nancy Fontaine wrote this chapter, and it reads the following. Marshall Brondum, everybody know who Marshall Brondum was? He did Marshall's TV. The irony about that was that Marshall was blind, and he still fixed TVs and had the first cable. So, I'm sorry?
He was on the fire board.
He was on the fire district, yeah. Marshall Brondum, Bill Disbrow, and many other Bonner Lions Club members must be given much of the credit for the organizing of the present fire protection unit in our area. It was formed in 1971 with the first fire call on July 18th, 1971. The station is located in the old Fleming Restaurant building in Piltsville. There are presently 3 men who rotate shifts to assure that a man is on duty at all times. In addition, there are about 25 active volunteers. When a call comes into the main station in Missoula, the man on duty radios back to the Bonner unit. The man there in turn presses the button which rings a signal through the telephones in the homes of 21 volunteers. And it never rang during the day. It was always like 2 in the morning. Never at a good time. The equipment at the fire station consists of 1 pumper truck, 1 tanker truck, a grass fire truck. This was written in 76, so this is the way it was in 76. 1 resuscitator and a rescue boat. It was due to the donations of the local people that the boat had been supplied with life preservers and other necessary equipment. The Missoula station provides the added manpower and equipment backup when necessary. That would be Missoula Station 1 on South Avenue, which was their first one. The firemen's wives had formed an auxiliary club which provides the coffee and sandwiches to the force when necessary. The boundaries of fire protection for the unit are east to Tura, west to Marshall Grade, to the LaFrey Springs and the Blackfoot, and across the bridge to the Bandman Flats. I think that might be it. So this one was written by Mildred Dufresne, who was a teacher at the school many years ago and was related to Al Dufresne. I think it might be a sister-in-law. I'm not sure. You guys know Mildred was Al's relation. Yeah. Anyway, she wrote a chapter in the book, and fires were a too frequent occurrence in most early day towns. Milltown was no exception. Whenever there was a fire, everyone would do his part. Water had to be pumped by hand, then carried or passed from person to person to the fire. Houses were built quite close together, so fires were hard to stop. The wooden structures burned quickly, and later a few spots of running water in the town helped a little bit. The fire trucks from the mills would answer calls in Bonner and Milltown. At the present time, both communities are well served by the Rural Fire Department. Some well-remembered fires here have been 1913 or 1914, the Riverside Saloon and adjacent Sear House. 1929, the Beetle Wagner Butcher Shop. That's back before the time of some of us here, maybe all of us. 1929, 4 houses, Mrs. Frida Nelson, Mrs. Taylor, Ed Johnson, Pete Nelson. 1932, Green's Pool Hall. 1932, Our Savior's Lutheran Church. I didn't know that had ever happened. 1942, Abramson and Pitaya houses and several garages and sheds. 1975, I don't want to try that one. A saloon, another saloon. We haven't run short yet. And while I'm yakking, I just wanted to observe one of the problems we used to have as a volunteer fire department was actually over manpower. And we'd have our training sessions on Thursday night. We'd have 20 guys there. And the last time you wanted to have a fire, if you're going to have one, was on Thursday night, because you'd have instant response with about 20 cars and 2 or 3 fire trucks. So that happened one Thursday night, and the call came in that there was a fire under the interstate bridge. And so we all hopped in our cars and paraded down the highway and the trucks and everything going, and we came to the interstate bridge, and there was a fellow who was cooking his dinner. And we had 20 volunteers and 2 fire trucks. So we had to put it out. That's what it was. And so we did put it out, and I think I took him back something to eat later, but we had some pretty funny events too. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, by the time I started in 1976, the department had actually came quite a ways. It was still the old 2-stall garage that you see being tore down back here, but we had engine 15 and engine 16 that were in those bays. Engine 15 was an old Dodge with a Dodge Hemi, yeah, and it had a transverse mounted separate engine to run the pump. And I don't know, Paul, was it a 4-cylinder or what was it?
Yeah, it was 4-cylinder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the most unique experiences I've ever had in my life was going code in engine 15, and about 45 miles an hour, the front fenders would start flapping. And if you got over about 50 miles an hour, you were going to fly. So it had some drawbacks to it. But I guess at the time it did the job we had. Engine 16 was a military surplus unit that had a front-mounted pump on it, and it had a power takeoff switch that you reached in behind and flipped, and that engaged a gear that hooked it to the front of the crankshaft, and that would start spinning the pump up. And my first fire was with Gary Madsen with that unit. We'd responded to a mobile home fire over on West Riverside, and I'm not sure how Gary and I got there by ourselves. I think there had to be another fire going somewhere else or something, but he and I ended up there by ourselves, and we were both volunteers at the time, and we pulled up and engaged the pump, and Gary, did it have a reel on it? It had a reel on the front, didn't it? Rick, did it have a reel? I think it did too. So, because I remember just pulling line, and Gary says, "Go to the window, knock the window out, put the nozzle in, and spin it around." So it was burning. The house is burning pretty good, and it's got some additions built on it. So we were running up to the house and get down below the sill of the window and slam the nozzle against the window and break the window out and clean the glass out and kick the bail open and slide the nozzle in there and spin it around like this, and the fire goes out. It works. Okay. Pretty amazing stuff. So we shut the water off. Some other people arrived to help us, and we went around to the front door and went in, and luckily there was no one in the house. There were some feline residents that weren't as fortunate, but they happened to be home. But actually quite a bit of the structure was saved, and that was my first fire and the one I remember. So, there's a gentleman here too. Well, let's talk a little bit about mutual aid. One of the things that makes this area pretty unique is how far away it is from the city. Station 1, our main station, is at South and Reserve, and it's 22 minutes for me when I drive to work, okay? So when you're running lights and siren and flying, it's still 14, 18 minutes before that engine can be here to help. So one of the things that this station is very, very dependent on is mutual aid from our neighbors. And the neighbors that I'm talking about are Clinton Fire and East Missoula Fire. So those organizations for automobile accidents and structure fires are paged at the same time Station 4 is in the current configuration we run now. And both of those organizations are still 100% volunteers. So they support this station in a very, very big way. Potomac Greeno to the north also comes down to mile marker 8 on all calls to help. So they're a big part of this response area also. And Paul, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Yep, Chief Lacey. Yep. When I first started, I think in the organization, Paul was, I think, my officer out here. So I'm just going to let you speak a little bit. I know you got stories.
I really hadn't planned to do that. I didn't think of anything. I guess I started as a volunteer, but I was in town and for 4 or 5 years, and then got hired. And first station they assigned me to was here, and all the volunteers out here trained me because I was kind of the rookie, even though I was the paid person.
That's how you turned out the best.
Yeah. They led me astray now and then, yeah. But the thing that I have to say to start with is the community here is so different than anywhere else in the valley, anywhere. It worked so well together, helped one another all the time. Heck, half of our maintenance on our fire trucks was done in the mill. Kurt George blew the pump apart on that thing one time and split it wide open, actually. And we took it to the mill, and they pinched it back together and welded it up, and we were ready to go again. And a number of the firefighters, of course, as Bill mentioned, came out of the mill. The mill allowed them to respond, even during work hours, and that's what made the thing successful. We had a roster of 25 people, and that was a department, I believe, maximum that they allowed us to have, but we always had 26 or 28. I mean, there was just a lot of people. And as the paid person who pushed that button on the phone that called all these guys, you had to really get your pants on quick, or they'd be at the fire station before you could get to the truck. They were really active. So we operated as well as a fully paid department in a lot of senses, just because of how quickly those guys responded, and they were in different parts of the community or from the mill, and it just worked excellent. It was a great deal. Another thing about the community, the way they supported the fire department was that, you might get a call as the paid person at the station. You might get a call just after you'd fixed dinner, and it's still on the plate, maybe, or on the stove. So you would respond in a number of the volunteers, and some of them would come to the station, and of course the dinner will get cold, so they'd go ahead and eat that for you, so it didn't get cold. But then the other side of that was that on holidays and people were barbecuing or whatever else, they'd bring food over to the fire station. So I think it more than worked out in the wash with that. But the gentleman that talked about the sprinklers in the mill, I have to agree with him. I believe those things actually saved that mill. Yeah, many times. So when the fire department responded, it kept the fire at a point where we could possibly put the thing out. You didn't mention those two big V12 diesel pumps down there.
I didn't, but in somewhere 58, 59, 60, they brought them two pumps over from mines in Butte, the open pit mine they had over there. They used them for pumping out the pit. That's when sometime in there, I guess that's when they started letting it fill up. Anyway, they brought them over here and used them for fire pumps. And them would put out 2,300 gallons per minute each on a 16-inch line. And we had to maintain them, and they were very good pumps. The engines themselves were replaced about 10 years before I retired. They put V8s on them. But when they brought them over here, they had they were inline 6-cylinder Fairbanks Morse engines with a blower and a turbocharger on them. They wanted to get everything, they took everything out of them engines they could take out of them.
If you were standing in that little building when they fired up,
you want to have earplugs in your ears, and when one of them fired up was bad enough, when the other one went off, your earplugs flew out of your ears. They were noisy.
The water system, in my mind, was excellent. It was a better water system than the city has, actually, in a lot of respects. That first engine that we had, if we went to a hydrant here, we could get better pressure on the hose just by not using the pump. Just run it right straight into the engine.
That was usually water coming off of the hill, and that was generally, I'm going to guess, at about 130 pounds pressure. We never really took a good gauge and really checked to see what that pressure was, but it was pretty close to 128, 130 pounds pressure on, and that was on a 16-inch line. Now, the one thing I wanted to say here too is that they talk about the old fires and fighting the old fires. They used a nozzle, a straight through nozzle. All they got was a straight stream of water out of them. as the years progressed, then they did get different style nozzles. There were spray nozzles, fog nozzles, different things like that too that made firefighting easier.
I guess, I hadn't thought about this too much, but one other thing I'd have to mention is the firefighters from here and equipment often responded to town. Mill fires at the particle board plant and wherever they were needed. And when I worked out here for, I don't know, 9 years, I guess, and then they moved me into town, but it was always a real relief to see these crews from here coming to the fires in town when you had a big fire going in the mill or something, because you had lots of good manpower that could really do the job.
Kind of a funny story that parallels what Chief Lacey's talking about is you're seeing behind me quite a few pictures of that yellow engine. Well, that yellow engine had seating in it for truly 5 people. And Bill Wheeler's barite plant was on fire right there alongside of the interstate by the Reserve Street exit. And we'd been listening to that fire on the radio out here at the station and seen the pages, and so there was a bunch of us gathered at the station. And the page came in for engine 40 to go assist at the barite fire. And so when that engine started loading up, there's 5 seats, there's 5 seat belts. Well, you know, we're kind of inventive sometimes. So the cab was full, and we sat on each other's laps in the jump seat. And so when that engine arrived on scene, Chief Soonram was the incident commander, and he started watching firefighters come off of that engine. And it was like the old clown movie. Just people just kept coming and coming and coming. Well, unfortunately, after that, there was a policy in the department that you had to have your own seat. But I think there was 9 of us that came out of that. But there were a lot of great, dedicated volunteers at the time.
Hey, Bill, I can't remember the truck number, but remember we had that one old truck that in the wintertime the pump froze up, you couldn't.
That was 16.
Yeah.
That was 16.
Still military.
Yep.
With the front mount.
Joe Devlin is talking about the old pump 16, or engine 16, and the pump was mounted on the front, and as it went down the road, if you didn't get every drop of water out of it, and it was freezing, it got all of that blast of cold air, and then it had frozen up by the time you got to the fire.
It did paper lock first.
So, thank you, Chief. And Judy, I don't know where you want this to go.
I gotta tell a few stories.
We've got folks here, please go out in front because we are recording.
And I guess I would offer that to any of the folks who'd like to come up and visit and tell a story.
For those of you that don't know me, I'm Art Bailey, and I was in on the beginning of all this, and I just reminiscing here a little bit ago, I thought about this, and I know a lot of you are going to relate to that. We had a semi laid over out here on the freeway, and this semi was full of shrimp. And the truck driver said that any of the boxes on this truck that were damaged, we could have. And I'll tell you, I ate shrimp for about 6 months. And I don't know how many of us was in on that. Were you there, Rick? There was a bunch of us.
What year was that?
Kurt. I don't know if they got away with any boxes out of that semi that were not damaged or not.
I missed that fire was at the Tigers, but some people must have melted boxes.
I didn't see that. I didn't see that.
You didn't see it because you were behind your back, you were pounding on, huh?
I want to tell you about my first fire call, and I believe it was the first fire call we had out here at Station 4. We had just purchased the lease on the station, and there were several of us out there that were cleaning up the station, washed the floors down, and we had, I don't remember the name of these little trucks. We had the little 6x, probably with what, 300 gallons of water or whatever, I don't know. We just finished washing this floor down and cleaning up the shop, and we were sitting around there talking, and we got our first fire call. So we throwed all the hoses on the truck real quick like, and we ran down here to Milltown, and it happened to be, and I believe this was Kenny Lezot's garage. And lightning had struck this garage, and it was in flame, and we got down there with the sirens blowing and the lights flashing, and fired up the pump, but we forgot one thing. We didn't have any water. We used it to wash the floor. But it wasn't all in vain, because shortly thereafter, Kenny Lezot joined the fire department. He realized that we needed all the help we could get. Another fire call we had was over here by the river. And it was a grass fire, probably about half the size of this room. The train started. And we charged over there with the fire truck and the sirens going and the lights flashing. And there was these two young ladies sunbathing there on the side of by the river, naked. And that old fire truck just about didn't get to that fire that we got between them, and the car was on one side, and their clothes were on one side, and of course, and we had to get to that fire. This was getting out of hand.
You were getting out of hand.
But they finally wrapped up in their towels and ran for the car, and we had fire out, and everything was secure. Another call we had was, one of our first calls was to assist the Rural Fire Department Station 1, and I believe it was Van Evans, but I'm not sure about it. It was one of the big mills in town. And we had that big, gigantic old tanker. 35 miles, 45 mile an hour, probably top speed. And we're going down the freeway with the lights flashing and sirens on, and boy, we're impressing everybody here, and everybody's passing us. And it got so embarrassing, we just finally said, let's just turn these lights off, shut the sirens down, and nobody will know what we're doing or where we're going, and we'll get to town. And you remember that truck?
I do remember that.
That was terrible. Terrible ordeal. I'm going to tell you one more story that I probably shouldn't, and then I'll let you go. It was on Halloween. And I go home and I get all dressed up and gussied up as a woman, and I had a dress on, I had my sister's wig on, and I'm pretty well endowed, and I got lipstick on and the whole 9 yards. Actually, I wasn't too bad looking. And I'm going over to Gene Nellner to trick-or-treat him. And I did, and we had a few drinks, and Bonnie's saying, boy, wouldn't it be something if we had a fire call right now. And it went off. Lo and behold, it was a fire at the mill. Well, you can't go home and wash your makeup off. You got to go. So we jumped in the truck, and I was first there, and I was driving the truck. And we get down to the mill, and the first thing I did, I believe I think it was on the boiler, but don't quote me on that. No, it wasn't either. I'll get to that in a minute. First thing I did was put my coat on, I had my hat on, and I rolled up my collar so nobody could tell who I was. And I had my boots on, along with my nylons, by the way. And I'm manning the truck, and I'm not going any further than that because I'm not going to let anybody know who I am. Well, George Neff come by. George Neff was the general manager of the plant. I don't think he recognized me, but he kind of gave me a funny look when he walked by, and he was wanting to make conversation about this fire, and I really didn't want to talk to him right then because of all the lipstick and whatnot. So he finally decides, Gene Nellner, and this fire was in the old teepee burner down by the boiler. Okay, it had already been condemned, and we were about to tear it down anyway, and it couldn't have hurt anything if it had burned everything in there. But we'd probably been pumping water into this thing for about an hour. The sides of this teepee burner are about 4 foot, 5 foot. And we got this thing full of water. And it's full of sawdust, and there's a little spot fire here and there, probably about as big as this table. Gene decided, and this was on Halloween night now, remember, and he had had a few drinks too. He decided that George and F need to see where these fires were. So he grabs George by the hand, he proceeds over that wall, and George is down there with his Oxfords on and his necktie on, and he stepped off that concrete wall and went plumb to his knees in water. And the fire wasn't even, I mean, they really decided that we needed some serious help. I'm amazed that we even survived this fire department business, but that was some of our calls. They weren't all good. Some of them were bad. One of my worst memory was of a little child that somebody had left one of these big fish hooks on a couch, snag hooks, and this child got the snag hook through its hand, and then it was hooked onto the couch. When we got there, the child was screaming and hollering bloody murder, and the best thing we could do was cut that hook off and get him to the hospital. So there was things like that. It was not all fun and games, but we did have a lot of fun. And it was a good time and good experience and a lot of good people to be with. Thanks.
I would offer anyone else that wants to tell a story. Come on, Keith. One of the things that we need to say here too, and is a big mission of the fire district changed as we grew, and one of our primary missions, our primary services to the community, became EMS, and Keith is one of the specialties. So I'm hoping maybe the specialists, not the specialties. And maybe Keith will visit some of that if he has a chance.
I just remember that fish hook thing. I went out to pick up and got the cutters to clip that thing off her. But I was just thinking about some of the equipment we had there, Bill. The old 6x6, 35 miles an hour. And then the one that I remember the worst, that I hated the worst, was that old crash fire rescue truck we had.
Oh, the old box truck.
That thing had the suicide doors on it. And when you got to going on it, it would start shaking, you couldn't steer it, and you'd have to slam on the brakes and get it slowed down and then go again. Anyway, Rick probably remembers this one. We was over here at the mill, and I had the truck.
This is your story.
This is my story. I'm telling it on me this time. We had that old fire rescue truck, and you had to, when you got to the fire, you had to push the clutch in and then pull the lever, and it would hold the clutch down, and you'd get out and crank it up. You know, when you got the water all hooked up, you'd crank the hand throttle, and as it would pick up RPMs, the clutch would slowly come out and engage the pump. You're supposed to take the truck out of gear before you do that. So anyway, we had it all hooked up, and I got out there and I started cranking her up, and Rick says, "Is this thing moving?" And I said, "Ah!" I cranked her up, pretty soon that clutch came out, and down the road that truck went, dragging the hose. And all I had to do was reach over and hit that throttle, but I didn't think about it. And I was in full turnout gear, and I was running after that truck. I finally got to the door, and I reached in and pushed the clutch down with my hand, got stopped. And Chief Schooner was over there, and he just stood there. And, who is that?
You know, I got called into the office on that.
Oh, you did? You must have been the on-duty officer that day.
And that was his first time out to watch the Bonner crew out.
Yep. We made a good impression, didn't we?
We made a good impression.
But anyway, and then we had that big tanker that Champion donated to us. And talk about overdone. That thing had a 4,000-gallon tank on it, and it was sticking out about, 6-8 feet behind?
Behind the frame.
Legal weight was, 34,000 pounds, and it was 64,000?
Yeah.
And no power steering. And you had to literally, if you were going around the slow corner, you had to literally stand up and just crank on that thing. One time, me and old Marty Lanier was headed for a fire up on, over across the river there, way up in the hill. That roof had caught on fire at that cabin up there, and we had a hard time getting it. Crystal Creek, yeah. And so that was the first time I think Marty had drove that truck, and of course I drove it as a logging truck before they ever shipped it over here. So anyway, he was driving that thing, and I tried to tell him you had to drive it like a jet. You had to start shutting down a mile before you got to your turn. Because it wouldn't turn, and it would not slow down either. It just had too much weight for the braking system it had. And we was headed down to Natura, and he was getting closer and closer. I said, Marty, you got to slow down. You got to slow down. Pretty soon he was getting to where he was going to start cranking. I said, go by, go by. And so he went by it, and we made the swing around in the old Happy Bungalow parking lot finally and got turned. But if he'd have tried to turn it, we'd have been upended. So anyway, a couple of the good experiences, and I remember one that Paul gave me one time. I got to tell on him. That's when his wife made him quit talking. He'd had some kind of a problem with your larynx and he wasn't supposed to talk. Well, anyway, I was with him on the water tender out of Station 1, and he was driving, and I was his assistant there, and of course I was, can I run the siren? And he said, there. So I hit the siren when we get to the intersection or something, but we got up on the fire. We had a big grass fire up on Linda Vista up on top of the hill there someplace, and so he gets out and we get out, and of course he motions me to go around the truck. So I went around the truck, and you know them old boots we always had them pushed down to where they were kind of a wide at the, about your knees. That's the kind you used to have to drag up to your hips. So I get around the other side of the truck, and all of a sudden here, was a 2.5 inch hole opens up, and he fills my boots clear full. I run around the truck, and he's sitting there going. So anyway, that was a couple. But our EMS, we had a good time with EMS. Me and Kurt was known as the CPR guys. He'd have one end, and I'd have the other, and Rick would come and peek in the door, and if someone wasn't in there doing CPR, he'd back out and wait till we got there. I've seen that happen many times. But yeah, Kurt and I had a lot of CPR calls, so we did a lot of CPR work, our EMS. So enjoyed it all, miss it a lot, but I'm glad I'm retired. That's it for me.
Kurt, you want to tell a story? Well, I would just say to you, all of the scrapbooks that are here on the table are Kurt's work. And he says he doesn't have a story to tell. You should go take a look at the books. Let's see, where else are we going to go with it? Sir?
Well, I'm kind of confused. When did you say the rural volunteer fire departments began? What date?
61.
61 is when it was officially established as Missoula Rural.
Okay, but there were volunteer fire departments
absolutely.
in Missoula before that?
Absolutely. The Orchard Homes Club started in '38, and they housed an engine at Karis Nursery. They actually burned their engine in their station in 1943, and from 1943 until 1959, that neighborhood, Orchard Homes and Target Range, worked to reestablish another organization, and they actually carried petitions a couple of times, but were unsuccessful in getting those petitions recognized. Then 59 to 61 they did it again, and in 1961 is when they were successful in organizing Missoula Rural Fire District at the station on 3rd Street.
And when did the one in the Rattlesnake begin?
You know, I didn't bring all of that literature with me, but I think it would have been in '68 that it became part of Rural Fire, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't organized before that under another name.
Are you interested in knowing how it started?
Absolutely.
My name is Douglas Grimm, and I live in the Rattlesnake, and unfortunately I've heard of a guy named Dennis Sane who lives up there also. Dennis, where are you?
Oh, you're standing, I'm sorry. I can't see that far. How many of you have been to the Rural Volunteer Fire Station in the Rattlesnake? Okay. Well, how many of you know that there's a street in the Rattlesnake called Evan Kelly? Okay. Why was it called Evan Kelly? Well, the head of the Forest Service was a man named Emmett Kelly. When I was a little kid in grade school, I remember waking up in the middle of the summer night to a horrible rainstorm and lightning storm. And then my parents got me out of bed and said, quick, there's a house or something on fire down farther in the valley. And in my pajamas, they threw me into the car and we drove down what is now called Duncan Drive, West Reno Drive, and sat and watched a big 2-story house burn at the corner of West Reno Drive and Evan Kelly. And it was the first house fire I had ever seen. And we also realized that up on Waterworks Hill, in the other direction, looking north, watching, was the fire department from the city of Missoula. But we were outside the city limits, so they couldn't help. And I remember sitting in the car and watching men carry furniture out of the house and setting it on the lawn. And the images of that stayed with me for a long time. I would sit sometimes at night and wake up and think about, God, I hope that doesn't happen to our house, because we don't have any way of putting the fire out. We have no fire department. And so when I think I was about I was either a junior in high school, and we had a group in the Rattlesnake called it wasn't the country, Dennis, what was it called? Rattlesnake?
Community Club. Edition Club.
Huh?
What is a Park Edition Club?
Well, no, they met at Rattlesnake School, and they had
Just a community club.
Rattlesnake Community Club. And they met once a month. And my dad was appointed to set up the entertainment for the next meeting. And I think I was a junior in high school. And I talked to my dad, and I said, what about having a meeting where we organize a volunteer fire department? So I got out, since I was an art student, I got out a piece of paper, 8.5 by 11, and I drew a bell in the corner and a clapper in it and rang clang, clang, clang. And I wrote on it about, we're going to organize a volunteer fire department. And the meeting will be at the Rattlesnake, at the Lincoln School. And so I went to the secretary at Hellgate, and asked her, could you mimeograph or Xerox, or ditto some copies of this for me? And the secretary said, well, you know, this is not a school project, and so therefore I can't. But since it's after school and the principal isn't around, give me your piece of paper. And she went over to the machine and cranked off 25 of these blue copies, which is about the maximum. And my dad picked me up, and we drove up both sides of the Rattlesnake. And there were about 25 homes in the Rattlesnake, from the end of Van Buren on up to Folsom Ranch. And I stopped at each mailbox and shoved one in and closed the door. And a couple of days later, there was a knock at my door, and it was the rural mailman. And he said, I understand you're the kid that was putting things in the mailbox. I remember this very distinctly, because he said, you know, you can't do that. You have to put stamps on them and put them in an envelope and give them to us, and we put them in. And I said, well, my dad bought the mailbox that's out in front of our house. He paid for it. And he said, yes, but it says U.S. mail, and once you put it on the post, it belongs to the U.S. government, and the only people that can put stuff in there. And he chewed my ass out royally. So I remember this very well. But there was at 7 o'clock at Thursday, a whole bunch of people showed up that had never been to a meeting before. And I remember standing on the steps of the Lincoln School, and these people were coming, not for the potluck, but for a meeting where we were going to organize, or there was something about a volunteer fire department. What do you do? And so people said, who's the guy in charge of this? Who has gotten all this started and everything? And finally, I kind of raised my hand, and some guy in the crowd said, oh, Christ, some goddamn kid. Well, let's get in to the auditorium. And they looked at me and said, you're in charge of the kids. You take them down to the basement and play with them. At the end of the meeting, I came out, and it lasted about an hour. And I said, Dad, what happened? What happened? He said, Mr. Purdy, who lived farther up on Gilbert, about 2 blocks north, he has volunteered his pickup truck. And Mr. Fred Bartholomew, who lives at the east end of the Rattlesnake Bridge, the bridge that crosses Rattlesnake Creek on Lolo, he always carries around a bunch of garden hose in his car. And whenever there is a fire, people always phone Fred Bartholomew, and he runs to that area, and he stretches the garden hose from the nearest house across the fields and tries to put it out. And he's donating his hoses to the pickup truck. And there is a guy who says he has a little pump that will work on 12 volts, and someone else has a tank that they're going to put on there that will fill with water. And Evan Reilly, who lives right across the street from the school on Lolo and Gilbert, said he has a 2 or 3 car shed that he stores his trucks in, because he had Evan Reilly Van and Storage and Moving Company, and he's going to give one of the bays. And so that was the beginning of the fire department in the Rattlesnake Valley.
What year was that?
That would be 1955 or 1956.
Wow.
Good job.
Thanks.
Do you know how long it stayed active?
Until we were taken into the city. How many years ago were we taken into the city?
Oh, the lower part?
The lower part?
20 years ago. 20 years ago. And then they built the fire station down on Madison, near Broadway. And within a year, they took our truck, or took it apart.
So it must have continued until it became
Must have continued, yeah. What were some of the names? Mix, Harold Bray. I looked up some of this in history for another presentation, and there was Mix and Harold Bray, and I thought Ralph was part of it during that
He time.
was,
but there was, we lived only a block from that, and I don't remember ever being a fire deal there. I do remember the Zolke home burning on, I'm trying to remember the road they were on. They're up on the hillside.
Of a jumbo.
And that fire truck it was a Model A, and it had come from Fort Missoula. And that was the only thing there was for that area.
That was before 1956.
One thing I've talked a little bit about earlier is mutual aid, and one of the gentlemen that's been speaking here is Bob Starr, and I think Bob should stand up too. Bob is chairman of the East Missoula Board of Trustees. And there's another gentleman that's in the back that's been an active part of this fire service for years. He's retired now and he's dodging the look, but past chief of Clinton and somebody who was very active in supporting this community, Keith Bumstead. So Keith, you need to stand up too.
Yeah, my name's Robert Starr, and I lived in the Rattlesnake pretty much all of my life, except the last maybe 20 years, where I moved out past East Missoula and got roped into being a board member on the East Missoula Volunteer Fire Department, and I haven't been able to escape that since. So I've been there about 20 years. I'm not a fireman. I do have a fire truck, and some of the people have seen it. It's a 1915 Model T Ford chemical fire truck. And anyway, we've had the fortunate we've been fortunate that Missoula Rural is around us, because we've had times where our volunteer system, since we're totally a volunteer fire department, has been down to maybe only 3 to 4 people. And your percentage of turnout isn't 100%. So here in the last 3 or 4 years, we've really got a bunch of really good volunteers. And I think even Missoula Rural appreciates us showing up out here in this area, because we can have almost 75% of our people show up at a fire. Again, we can't get them all in a truck possibly, but they know the situation, and volunteers anymore are really, really hard to get and keep. So we really appreciate Missoula Rural. East Missoula Fire was established in 1949, and actually I believe it became a county, probably a county supported through taxes in the 60s, about the same time as Missoula Rural, but it actually was established in 1949 in East Missoula. And as far as I know, I don't remember it ever coming up the Rattlesnake to do any work, but I do remember when my brother was a battalion chief or with the Missoula Rural Fire Department for 30 years. So his name is mentioned and his pictures are here, and he looks a lot older now for some reason. Anyway, I don't know if you have anything else.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. One of the things that Mr. Stars mentioned is change in volunteers and how hard it is to get volunteers and people now to form and do the projects that the volunteers in this community did. The change in the mill setting is a big thing, and that's changed the service oriented people that are available in this community, whose home and bread and butter was here. You know, these guys were fighting for their jobs when they were fighting fire in that mill, because it was their job. And that piece of the service has changed in a big way out here. We still work as a combination department. And one of the things that has changed in a big way is how desirable the career of a firefighter is. Young people truly seek and work very hard to have that opportunity. And one of the things that's adapted, if you will, very well to the Missoula Rural Fire model is to encourage that through an affiliation with the Helena College of Technology. And we're also working some with the University of Montana to form, we have an associate fire science degree, and part of that changing economy, changing philosophy in the community has created a need to find another form of volunteers. And the way that that's worked using the College of Technology format is we have residents that live in the fire station. We've modified the station. We have the career person that's 24 hours a day. We have a career person that's 10 hours a day. And then we have 3 resident firefighters who are students, or some are graduates, and live in the station in exchange for a place to live. They respond to fires, and they guarantee that they'll be there 1 12-hour shift every 3rd day. We also have volunteers in the community at large, and that's the whole Missoula community, who are students who volunteer. And part of their service requirement to be an active and volunteer in good standing is to work 2 12-hour shifts a month and attend the training and the orientation that they go through to become effective firefighters. And Captain Paulson, my training officer, who is, gosh sakes, 30-year member of this organization, started out here when he was about 17, I think. He can talk a little bit about the training. Rick, would you do that?
Tell about running from CPR.
From what?
Tell about running from CPR.
No, you got to do it.
You don't have to be trained for that. One of the things that when I started being a volunteer out here, I think I was a junior in high school, 16 years old. Yeah. Well, it wasn't a big deal then. It wasn't a big deal. to where now, when I look at that whole thing, how that all processed out, is that the guys here, the Kurt Georges, Paul Lacey's, everybody else here, kind of helped that. We trained, you know, you pick up things from everybody that was a part of this organization, and I've tried to duplicate that now in my job as a training officer for Missoula Rural, and can't duplicate it. I mean, it was something special that occurred out here that I don't think anybody else had. Yeah, I mean, we had our own way of doing things. If we wanted a different fire truck, we didn't go through all the political stuff that we go through today. We just went down and got it. If it was at the headquarters station and we wanted it, we got it. SCBA's, all of that stuff, I mean, that's kind of how we did things. There was rules for everybody else, and there was rules for us. What we do now, how it's changed, is we still meet on Thursday nights, and everybody, all the volunteers here will remember the Thursday night trainings. And it was kind of a club, and everybody always came. And it was, if somebody didn't come, the times when I worked in the Rattlesnake and out here, if you didn't show up at a training session, somebody was going to call. If you didn't show up to a call, somebody was going to call your house. It didn't matter if it was 3 o'clock in the morning. There must have been a reason why you didn't show up. And somewhere we've lost that, and that's why this time that I spent out here was so special. What we do now is I run guys through a recruit class that, you know, I'll keep them about 3 months, once a week, going through the training process, going through training, trying to get them orientated into everything that they're gonna cross when we get out in the field. And that would have been fine for us because we had 25 guys that stayed. I mean, it was tough to get into. If you were waiting on the outside, you were waiting for a long time. Now, I'll run 2 to 3 recruit classes with 14 or 15 guys every year, and we're not keeping them. You know, and it's just, I think what everybody out here had was that community and giving something back to the community, and those days are gone. So I applaud everybody that was a member, and well, you still are members. I think you're going to be members forever because of the pictures that we have and the history. So again, thanks everybody for your time spent, and you're still giving.
So, sir?
Glenn Smith one day.
You come back up here. You know, I couldn't believe that he walked away without telling a funny story, because there are lots of them. No, you need to come over here.
No, this one, they can hear me fine, I think. We were doing some training at the mill on how we're gonna get guys out of different places, and Glenn comes up, you know, he says, you know, you guys ever really thought about how you're gonna get me out of that crane if something happens to me up there? And I said, yeah, we thought about it, we talked about it, we gotta figure it out. Well, how are you gonna do it? I said, we're probably gonna quarter you.
Oh, goodness, I should just quit right there. You can't hardly beat that. So, Missoula Rural Fire Department today. Altogether, we are 5 stations. We run about 2,200 calls a year. We're Lolo, Bonner, the main station at Reserve and South Avenue, a station on Mullen Road, and a station out by the airport. There's 39 career people, there's 60 volunteers, and there's 12 residents who live in the stations who are college students that I've talked about. The crew that is back here, I think we need to get them to stand up. The pictures that are running behind you were organized by the engineer here that's here today, Mike Bowman. Mike's dad actually was a volunteer for many years in the Rattlesnake, and when the Rattlesnake station closed, Mike's dad, Larry, became a volunteer at Station 4 and finished his volunteer years of service. The next gentleman is Carl Brock. Carl is a second-year student in the College of Technology, and is actually a first-year resident. He's just finishing, what, about 3 weeks now as a resident out here? Okay. The young lady is Nicole Roybal. She actually has graduated. She has a 4-year degree in criminology from the University of Montana. She is studying and working to become a career firefighter. I was listening to the places she's going to test in the next week, and I don't remember all of them, but I know she's going to Seattle, she's going to Colorado Springs, she's going to, where else, Nicole?
Spokane Valley, Tacoma, they have their tests, and up to Bozeman.
Okay. And the next young man is truly a volunteer. He is 100% volunteer in the community right now. He is also a student. His name is Cole Riley, and this is his second shift as a volunteer firefighter at Station 4. He's worked one 12-hour shift before. This is his second shift, so this is brand new stuff. He's a junior at the university, and he's going to have to help me with what he is doing. It's something to do with PT, physical therapy preparation.
Applied health science.
There you go. So these are your fire crew today. These are the folks. Dang, I just about made it. These are the folks who are doing the job now. Thank you. So, again, 40 years in the community, and there's lots of things going on. The department is working very hard to continue to provide service. We are full service. About 55-60% is EMS. Fires are truly becoming less and less of what we do. We do confined space, a lot of rescue stuff. And I anticipate with the changes in the river and the dam and the recreation that's going to happen out in this area as this becomes accessible and workable for boaters and those kinds of things, that we're going to experience some change and some increase in activity as that is an exposure, a risk management kind of thing that we'll be looking to in the future. So again, as Rick said, thanks to all you folks who have been part of this, and thanks for the opportunity, Judy.